He left his $40,000 gold Rolex half hidden under a stack of towels in the guest bathroom, right where he knew she'd be cleaning. It wasn't kindness, it was a test. But what the maid did when she found it didn't just shock him, it cracked something in his chest he didn't know was still alive. The morning sun spilled across the marble floors of the South Atlanta estate, turning the glass walls into mirrors of light. It was the kind of house you didn't just live in, you displayed it like a trophy. And at its center sat Grayson Maddox, barefoot in silk pajamas, stirring espresso he wouldn't drink. He stared at the security monitor mounted discreetly behind a framed Monet. She was on camera, again. Danica Hayes, early 30s, quiet, wore the same gray cleaning shoes every shift, always tied her braids in a low bun, never smiled unless someone else did first. He'd hired her 6 months ago through an agency, background check clean, references glowing. And yet something gnawed at him. She was too careful, too invisible. And for a man who'd been burned by a lying ex-wife and 2 business partners in court, invisibility was its own kind of warning. So today he was testing her, not with words, not with questions, but with a Rolex Submariner worth $40,000. 18K gold. Tucked just enough under the top towel in the 3rd guest bathroom, the one Danica was assigned to today. He wanted to see if she'd take it or pocket it, or even just look at it too long. Some part of him wanted her to fail, because then at least he'd be right, about people, about trust, about keeping his heart armored behind wealth and walls. Down the hallway, Danica pushed her cart of supplies with a soft creak, humming under her breath. Old Whitney Houston, something her mom used to sing in the kitchen. Her back ached already. 3rd house of the day, 2 more to go. But this one always made her feel the smallest. Everything gleamed, everything whispered, "You don't belong here." She never looked directly into the security cameras, but she knew they were there, and she acted like she didn't care, still. She noticed when towels were folded differently, when shoes were left angled too perfectly, as if someone was watching to see if she'd move them. And today, something already felt off. But rent was due Friday. Her daughter's school needed supplies. She didn't have time to question a feeling. She picked up her gloves and turned toward the guest bathroom, 3rd door on the left. If you were her, cleaning for a man who didn't trust you, would you walk away or stay and prove him wrong? Let us know in the comments what your gut would tell you. The guest bathroom smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. The marble countertop gleamed like water. Danica reached for the top towel, just to refold it, and that's when she saw it. Gold. A gleam so loud it seemed to hum in her peripheral vision. She blinked, looked again. It wasn't hers. It couldn't be. It was a Rolex Submariner, half tucked under the white Egyptian cotton towels, like it had slipped out of someone's hand. But no one else came into this bathroom. It was one of the least used guest quarters, always pristine, always untouched. And suddenly, the room didn't smell like lavender anymore. It smelled like a setup. She stared at the watch for a second too long, her breath shallow, eyes narrowing. "Okay, Danica," she murmured to herself. "What is this?" She didn't touch it, not yet. Just stared. Then slowly, carefully, like it might burn her, she reached into her back pocket and pulled out a pair of latex gloves, slid them on. Her fingers trembled just slightly, barely visible, but she felt it, deep in her spine. She lifted the Rolex, held it for a moment, eyes tracing the gold links. It was warm, probably from the sunlight streaming through the window, or maybe from the weight of judgment sitting in the room with her. And then she did something simple, something small, but something Grayson Maddox never expected. She walked out of the bathroom, straight down the hall, past the staircase, past the sitting room, and gently placed the Rolex on the center of the dining table, where the housekeeper left mail and packages to be seen. Then she went back to work. No panic, no sneaking, just the quiet, confident gesture of someone who'd been judged before and didn't need to explain who she was. From his office upstairs, Grayson watched the whole thing play out on screen. She didn't steal it. She didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, stunned, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something crack in his chest, something like guilt, or maybe admiration. He didn't know which scared him more. Danica scrubbed the edge of the shower until her knuckles went red beneath her gloves. She didn't want to think about the watch, or what it meant, or why it was there. But her brain wouldn't stop looping it. It wasn't an accident. It was a test. And the moment she put that Rolex on the table, she knew someone, somewhere in this house, had been watching. Probably him. She exhaled sharply, shook her head, and kept cleaning. Upstairs, Grayson stood in front of the fireplace with his hands in his pockets. He wasn't used to being wrong. Not in business. Not in court. And definitely not about people. And yet, she hadn't even hesitated. He kept watching the security footage, rewinding, playing it again, not because he didn't believe what he saw, but because he didn't understand it. She could have pocketed it. She could have walked out with it, and he wouldn't have noticed until dinner. But instead she placed it, deliberately, almost gracefully, on the table, like she wasn't afraid, like she wanted him to see. Later that afternoon they crossed paths in the hallway, Danica pushing her cart, Grayson exiting his office. He almost walked past her but stopped. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice low. She turned, polite but unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Maddox?" There was a pause, just long enough to make the silence heavy. "Everything all right today?" he asked, eyes searching hers. She held his gaze, calm, measured. "Yes, sir. Guest bathroom's finished, and I left something on the dining table that I figured you might want back." There was no accusation in her voice, but there was no warmth either. Grayson nodded once. That was all he could manage. She turned and walked away. Back in the kitchen, Danica took a sip from her water bottle and stared out the window. The air outside looked free, like it had never been judged. She blinked back the sting behind her eyes. She wasn't mad, not exactly. She was tired of having to prove she wasn't who people assumed she was. Upstairs, Grayson sat back down at his desk and opened his laptop. But for 10 minutes he didn't type a single word. He just stared at the Rolex on the table and hated the part of himself that thought it had been a clever idea. The storm rolled in late that afternoon, thick clouds, sudden wind, and a crack of thunder so sharp it rattled the chandeliers. Danica was in the laundry room, folding pillowcases, when the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. Silence. Then the low, dull hum of emergency backup power kicked in, just enough to keep the freezers running and the security gates locked. She sighed and reached for her phone, but the screen was black. Dead battery, of course. She stepped into the hallway just as Grayson appeared from the opposite end, holding a flashlight. Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away this time. "You okay?" he asked. Danica nodded, folding her arms. "Yeah, just no power. I'll finish the last room tomorrow." He looked past her to the back windows shaking slightly in the wind, then back at her. "You don't drive in weather like this." She raised an eyebrow. "I've driven through worse." "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you. There's a guest room down the hall. Stay until it clears." Danica opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, not because he was right, but because, for once, she saw no judgment in his eyes, just concern, or something like it. 10 minutes later, she sat awkwardly on the far end of the long, L-shaped sofa in the den. Grayson stood by the window, watching the wind bend the trees like ribbon. Neither of them spoke for a while. "You do this often?" she finally asked. "Test people?" He didn't look at her. "I used to test investments. Then I started testing people. Same logic, same risk." She studied him. His face wasn't smug. It was tired, like maybe he didn't even believe his own answer anymore. "You didn't need a watch to learn who I am," she said softly. "You just had to look." He finally turned toward her, but before he could reply, the lights flickered on, just for a moment, then off again. In the dark, they sat, two people who came from different worlds, now sharing the same storm, and for the first time, Neither one had anywhere else to go. At this point, what do you think Grayson should do? Hold on to his pride or take the first step to make things right? Tell us your prediction in the comments. The storm had settled into a steady rhythm, rain like a drumbeat on the windows, thunder rumbling in the distance. The generator finally kicked in again, giving the room a soft, golden glow. Grayson brought her a blanket without a word. Danica took it, nodding her thanks. They sat quietly for a while. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "I grew up in a trailer," he said, not looking at her. "2 brothers. Mom worked nights. We had 1 space heater and a hole in the roof we covered with a trash bag." Danica glanced over, surprised. "I was 13 the first time someone stole from us. Our neighbor. Took my mum's tips from the diner." He paused. "I decided right then, I'd never be poor again. Never trust anyone either." She folded the blanket tighter around herself. "And now you own 6 homes and test your stuff like lab rats," she said, voice dry. He let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, something like that." Danica stared at the rain again, then quietly. "I worked in a hotel before this. 5-star, downtown." Grayson looked at her, listening. "One night a guest left a diamond earring under the sink. I found it during turndown service, turned it into security." She exhaled. "They still fired me. Said they couldn't prove anything. But they didn't want to risk the image." Silence. "It took me 2 years to get hired through the agency. People don't say it out loud, but you can tell when they don't want to trust someone like me." Her voice didn't shake. It was calm, controlled. That made it land even harder. Grayson stared at her, the weight of her story sitting like bricks on his chest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shrugged, but her eyes shimmered. "Sorry doesn't undo the scar," she said, "but it's a start." He looked at her then, not as an employee, not as someone to watch, but as a woman who had survived far more than he'd ever realized, and maybe, just maybe, someone worth knowing. The storm outside softened into a misty drizzle. Inside, the mansion felt smaller somehow, less like a fortress and more like a place where 2 people were finally seeing each other clearly. Danica stood near the fireplace now, wrapped in the blanket. She wasn't quite comfortable, but she wasn't uncomfortable either. Grayson walked in from the kitchen holding 2 mismatched mugs. "Chamomile," he said, offering one. "It's all I had. Don't judge me." She raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Rolex drinks chamomile." He chuckled, a real laugh this time. "Don't let the watch fool you, I'm deeply uncool." Danica took the mug, her fingers brushing his. A moment passed. It lingered, but neither acknowledged it. They sat across from each other again, closer now. Not at opposite ends of the couch this time, but within reach. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a sip. She nodded. "When you found the watch, did you think about keeping it?" She didn't answer right away, just stared into her tea. "For a second," she said honestly. "Not because I wanted to steal it, but because I wanted to see how it felt to hold something so untouchable." Grayson said nothing, but he understood more in that one line than he had in months of knowing her. Danica looked at him. "You keep your heart like you keep this house. Locked, guarded, watched. Is that what you think?" "No," she said. "That's what I know, because I do it too." The air grew still. Not heavy, just honest. Then, surprisingly, Danica smiled. "But the tea's not bad." He smiled back, a slow, unfamiliar curl of his lips that felt like it hadn't been used in years. For a moment, the mansion didn't feel so cold. The storm was passing, and maybe, just maybe, so were their walls. The next morning broke grey and silent. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy. Danica stood in the kitchen, making herself a small cup of coffee. She didn't touch anything else. The house was still. Grayson hadn't come down yet. Her overnight bag was by the door. She was going to leave quietly. Until she saw the envelope. It was sitting near the fruit bowl, her name written in Grayson's sharp, careful handwriting. She opened it, expecting maybe a thank you or an apology. Instead, Inside was a check for $10,000. Her breath caught. The note read, "For your integrity, for not taking what you could have, you deserve more than this job can give you." She read it twice, then a third time. The sting wasn't from the money. It was from the fact that he still didn't see her. Grayson entered the room just as she was folding the check back into the envelope. "I meant that as a gesture of respect," he said carefully. Danica's voice was low, controlled. "You think my dignity's for sale?" "No," he said quickly. Look, I messed up, I tested you, and you proved me wrong. This was a way to make it right." She turned to face him, eyes shining, not with gratitude but fury. "I opened up to you. I told you things I haven't told anyone in years, and you think throwing money at me is how to say you see me." Grayson stepped forward. "It's not just money. It's an opportunity. You said you wanted more. I can help." "You think I told you those things so you'd rescue me," she cut in, voice trembling. "You don't get it. You still don't." A beat passed. "You weren't trying to understand me," she said. "You were trying to fix the guilt without facing what caused it." He didn't speak. Couldn't. Danica set the envelope on the counter. Gently. Finally. "You can keep your check," she whispered. "I'm not for sale." She grabbed her bag and walked out, the door closing behind her with a soft but final click. And Grayson? He stood in that gleaming kitchen surrounded by everything money could buy, and realized it meant nothing if the one thing he wanted to earn had just walked away. Danica sat on the bus with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, the seat beside her empty. Her overnight bag sat at her feet, damp from the rain. She stared out the window, watching Atlanta's skyline disappear in the distance. The envelope was still in her purse. She hadn't cashed the check. She hadn't thrown it away either. Part of her wanted to rip it to shreds. Part of her wondered what it meant that he offered it at all. But mostly, she felt hollow. She had let him in. Just a little. She had believed for a moment that maybe he was different. Maybe he saw her. But in the end, it was just another transaction. Another man with money and guilt. Across town, Grayson sat alone in the den, the fire long gone out. The Rolex was back on his wrist, but it felt heavier now, like a chain. He stared at the checkbook on the table, still open. "Why did I write it?" he muttered to himself. He didn't need to ask. He knew. Because it was easier to throw money at a problem than to say the words that scared him. "You matter. I was wrong. I see you." He ran his hands through his hair and closed his eyes. Then he reached for his phone, hesitated, put it down, picked it up again, typed out a message, deleted it, then tried again. Meanwhile, Danica stepped off the bus near her apartment. The streets were slick, her sneakers soaked through. She fumbled for her keys at the building's front door. Her phone buzzed. A message. "Grayson Maddox. You were right. I tried to pay away the shame instead of facing you like a man. You deserved a real apology. Not a check, not a test. Just truth. If you're willing, I'd like a second chance to do it the right way." She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over it. She could delete it, or she could answer. Not for him, but maybe for herself. 3 days passed. Danica didn't reply to the message, not because she didn't feel something, but because she needed time, to make sure she was responding with her heart, not her hurt. On the 4th morning, a knock echoed softly at her apartment door. She opened it slowly. Grayson stood there, no suit, no Rolex, no chauffeur waiting at the curb. Just him, holding something small in his hand. "Hey," he said, voice quieter than she remembered. She said nothing, just looked at him. He opened his palm. It was the gold Rolex. But now it had something new added. An inscription on the back. She took it, turned it over. "For the one who taught me what worth really means." Her eyes didn't tear up, not yet, but her lips parted slightly, caught off guard. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's the point. I didn't come to prove anything. I came to say thank you, and I'm sorry." He took a breath. You showed me something I've never seen. Not in courtrooms, not in contracts, just in you. Danica looked down at the watch again. So what now? She asked. He shrugged. Coffee? Conversation. Whatever you're willing to give. She finally smiled, just a little, but it was real. You still drink chamomile? He laughed. Unfortunately, yes. Danica stepped aside, holding the door just wide enough. Then you better come in before it gets cold. He entered and the door closed behind them, not with a slam, not with tension, but with the soft click of something beginning. Across the room, on her tiny kitchen counter, she set the Rolex down next to her daughter's school photo, because to her it wasn't a test anymore. It was a reminder that someone finally saw her worth and chose to come back, not with money, but with truth. Do you believe true connection can survive even after it's tested by pride, pain, or the past? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. Someone out there might need to hear it.